Shavua Tov, everybody. Looking forward to learning now. So we've had, over the past few sessions, the option to join on Zoom. Today, there was an issue with the Zoom registration. So today's class we'll do on YouTube, and then we'll have the Zoom link for registration up starting next week. Okay. I want to start with a story about Levi Yitzchak Miberdichev. Shalom again, Yochev. And by the way, that's who we've been learning about, is Levi Yitzchak Miberdichev. So he had this nickname. He was called the Defender of Israel. And we have to ask ourselves, how did he earn this nickname? Yeah, sorry, no Zoom tonight, but we'll Zoom again starting next week. He was called the Defender of Israel. And so this story illustrates why he was called the Defender of Israel. So one Shabbat, the Kedushat Levi was walking home from Shul. Shalom, Nathan. And he saw a fellow Jew, somebody that he knew, smoking a cigarette. Now, smoking is something that you're not allowed to do on Shabbat, because you can't light a fire on Shabbat, and you can't kindle a fire, which is what happens when you smoke a cigarette. And so he asks this fellow Jew of his, he says, excuse me, I see you're smoking, but perhaps you did not know that it was Shabbat. And this Jew says, oh yes, no, I actually did know it was Shabbat. And then Levi Yitzchak says, oh, well then, you must not know that smoking is prohibited on Shabbat. And Levi Yitzchak said, oh no, and the Jew said, well actually, I know that smoking is prohibited on Shabbat. And Levi Yitzchak said, oh, well, perhaps you think that this is somehow good for your health. And the guy said, actually, no, I know it's not great for my health. I just really enjoy doing it, and I know it's forbidden on Shabbat, but I'm going to do it anyway. And then Levi Yitzchak turns heavenward, and he says, Ribono shel olam, look, even when they break your commandments, look how honest your people Israel are. That kind of positivity in judging his fellow Jew is what led Levi Yitzchak to be called the Defender of Israel. And it seems like that story is just nice, that there's a good moral in there, that we should always judge others with what we call in Hebrew bekaf zchut. And that literally translates to a spoonful of zchut is like innocence. We should always judge people favorably, and it's a nice story to that effect. Yeah, it is a funny story. Nathan, thanks for that great emoji. But what Levi Yitzchak was doing in that moment goes much deeper than just a general feeling of wanting to be kind to fellow Jews and judging them favorably. He was doing something which he thought was going to elicit compassion, not just from others, but from God too. And so that's what we're actually going to read in this week's passage from Parshat Shoftim. So our Torah portion began with this line: Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'chol sha'arecha. You should put judges and guards for yourselves at all of your gates. V'shaftu et ha'am mishpat tzedek, and they shall judge the people righteously with b'mishpat tzedek. And here's what the Kedushat Levi has to say about that. He says, Dehine hakadosh baruch hu shofet et hakneset Yisrael bevo yom hamishpat begodo rachamav v'chasadav. He says, see, God judges all of Israel on the day of judgment with compassion and kindness. Ach, it aruta dilitata leorer ito hamida shorachamana lemala. However, our actions that we do below actually elicit, they awaken these kind of characteristics of kindness above. Now, we've seen that in the past, this idea that Levi Yitzchak floats where our actions elicit a response from God. We read about this with the idea of B'Tselem Elohim. He reads B'Tselem Elohim, and the idea that our actions, when we're kind, we bring down God's kindness into this world. When we when we act selfishly, when we act in a way that's evil, that's mean, then we actually bring down, God's meanness into the world. It's a reflection from below to above. And he says when we judge favorably here, we're eliciting that kind of compassionate judgment from above. But how is it that we can awaken this characteristic, God's characteristic of kindness? Kisha'anu lamata mitnahagim bechesed umelamdim zechut al ish miYisrael ledunan lechav zechut. Ve'az al yedei zeh gam milmala nit'orer oto hamida. When we down below act in a way where we teach the innocence of others, when we judge others bekaf zchut, when we judge them favorably first, then by this we awaken from above that same characteristic. Umelamdim gam alav v'gam al kol zera Yisrael chasadim. And because of this, God will teach on this person, on the person who judges his fellow creatures, with innocence, who judges them favorably. God will also judge this person bekaf zchut, judge this person with a favorable light, and also that compassion will then extend to all of Israel. Ve'imken. I'll give an example of this in the real world. If you've ever been cut off while you were driving, and you're very angry at the car in front of you, you'll notice most of us have a tendency to assume the worst, that this person had done it, specifically, for selfish reasons. But what the Kedusha Levi is saying, kind of like our story exemplifies. First, judge people favorably. Maybe this person is on his or her way, to deliver a baby. Maybe this person is on their way to do a mitzvah. Maybe they're rushing to visit somebody who's sick, somebody who's ill, somebody who's dying. You never know. And sometimes you'll actually be right, But that kind of outlook on the world is critical, says Levi Yitzchak. I mean, it's critical not only for one's personal well-being and their mental health, to stop assuming the worst in people, but here he says it's critical, because we are the ones who bring down God's characteristics. God is compassionate. God is kind. God is, favorable in judgment, but only to the extent that we ourselves live out those values. Yes, mitzvah goreret mitzvah. As Rabbi Rotenberg wrote, my mom says, yes, a mitzvah brings another mitzvah from Pirkei Avot. Yeah, so that's interesting. In that sense, our mitzvah down here, you're saying, brings down a mitzvah from above. A nice way to read that too. Be'imken, we'll continue in the text. Ha'adam me'orer ba'uvda shalamata ha'sha'ar ha'elyon liftoach sha'arei chesed ma'arik bracha al kol zera Yisrael. And if this is the case, a person down below, through his or her actions, has the power to awaken the upper gates, Sha'ar Ha'elyon, the gate up above, Livtoach sha'arei chesed, and to open the gates of kindness. Laharik bracha al kol zer Yisrael, through which it says laharik, to empty out, to empty out blessings on Israel. That is to say, for blessings to pour out from heaven to Israel. So he's playing on the word sha'arecha. Remember, in the beginning we said you should put judges on your gates. So he says the reason that gates are mentioned there is it's a hint to us that we have the power to open the pitchei chesed, the gates of kindness up above, through our actions down below. They are there. God has those gates ready to be opened, but we have the key, and the key is our actions. And when we act down below, when we, act in a way that is kind, when we judge others favorably, then those gates open up, and blessings pour out of them. Zishakatu. So this is what's written: Shoftim v'shotrim titen lecha b'kol sha'arecha. You should put judges and officers on all of your gates. Ratzah lomar, that is to say, she'ata be'atzmecha titaken v'tachin hamishpat shel mala al yedei sha'arecha, that you yourselves can improve, you can even fix the judgment from above by way of your gates. Our gates are powerful, he says. When we put in the front of our cities, imagine an ancient city. You start with a gate, and that's where, in these ancient cities, judges would sit and verdicts would be cast. The way that we act at those gates elicits, God's characteristics of kindness and chesed, from above. And I also want to expand it. It's not just the physical gates. The gates of these cities are where it's the first place people see when they enter a new city. It's the door in which people enter. And I want to relate that to ourselves in that, the first time that we talk to somebody, that we interact with somebody, what does that look like? That is our gate. Our gate is that first moment of connection with another person. Maybe we're just seeing them from afar. Maybe we're starting a conversation with them. But by way of those gates, those first moments of interaction, we have the power to open the gates up above. Those first moments are critical. And when we fill those moments, those first moments of interacting with others with kindness, when we fill those, looking at others b'kaf zchut, looking at them in a favorable light, then the gates of heaven, so to speak, are flung open for blessings to come down from them. When we have justice and kindness and righteousness at our gates, then the gates of heaven follow suit. And our comment says the view of man's relationship with God feels like a parallel to the famous "do not do to others what you do not want done to you." Yeah, that's an interesting point. Here, you're right, the Kedusha Levi says God acts to us how we act to others. We're sort of showing God the kind of reality that we want to live in. Okay, we'll continue a little bit. So our gates have power, and by way of our gates, we elicit a particular response from the gates up above. He says, so it's through your gates and your actions that you elicit this reaction from above. V'zehu, and so we've concluded here. V'shavtu et ha'am mishpat tzedek. You shall judge your people mishpat tzedek, with a righteous verdict. Ratzah lomar, that is to say, kol ish yilamed et atzmo Lehitnaheg lishpot et ha'am mishpat tzedek. Each person should teach him or herself to regularly judge others with a righteous judgment. That is to say, this law is not just for ancient cities and gates. It's not just for judges. He says each person, what this means is that each and every one of us should train ourselves to see each other in a favorable light. Now, this word hitnaheg really does mean to train yourself. It's something that it's something that takes work to see others in a favorable light. And what we can do now is just catch ourselves when we are upset at somebody, when somebody bothers us. Take a second and try and see them b'kaf zchut. Try to read the situation so it teaches their innocence. Read it in a way that's favorable to them. Just try it. When you receive a hard text from somebody, say, maybe they're having a hard day too, and I don't understand the full picture. It is generous to do that. And that's the point. Kedusha Levi says what this text says, what this verse means, it's that we should judge each other generously, overly favorable than maybe what each other deserves. And through that we'll see kind of the main reason for doing so coming up. He says, L'lamed tzedakah uzachut al kol zeri Yisrael. We do this in order to teach righteousness and innocence for each and every Jew. Va'az ha'adam me'orer hasha'ar shomala. And when one does this, one awakens the gates above. Va'al yedei zeh yotzei badin zakai b'mishpat shomala. One leaves heavenly judgment having been judged innocent from above. When we are generously favorable to others, judging them in a way that first teaches their innocence, then we show God that we are worthy of that same level of compassion, which is to say each of us needs that level of compassion. We need God to teach us with maybe a little extra kaf zchut, a little extra spoonful of innocence, so to speak. And then this last line I love. He says, Ki b'midah she'adam moded modedim lo. This is a line that gets repeated in rabbinic literature because the way that one judges others, he or she is also judged. The way you judge others, you yourself are judged. So now he brings it also into the physical realm. Not just God, but others too. When we meet nahagim otanu, when we train ourselves to see others first in a favorable light, to be generous in our teaching about each other's innocence, to be generous in teaching, to assuming the best in others, then others will assume the best in us when we mess up, and we need that. And then it goes even beyond that. God does too. And then when we are before God in judgment, God also sees us in a favorable light, teaches the best in our actions, and we leave heavenly judgment having had a little extra zchut, a little extra innocence, a little extra favorable judgment, even if we may not have totally deserved it. This goes back to the story, of course, of Levi Yitzchak and that Jew who was smoking a cigarette on Shabbat. Any one of us, a normal person, who was Shomer Shabbat, who understood the significance of smoking, might have judged that person immediately negatively. To look at that person and say, oh my gosh, they don't care about Shabbat. They don't care about anything Jewish. I can't believe they're doing this. I'm going to turn away. I'm going to walk as fast as I can away. I want nothing to do with this person. But the Kedushat Levi, you see, he worked hard. Clearly, he had trained his soul to see the best in his fellow Jew, and he was able to find, even in this person's clear disrespect for the laws of Shabbat, some kind of favorable thing to point to, saying, look, Ribono Shel Olam, look, God, how honest your people Israel are. It's a funny story. But what's deeper in that story is Kedushat Levi wasn't just doing that because he was nice. He was doing it because he felt like this was going to open the gates of heaven to a favorable judgment for him and for all of Israel. Because he knew if he acted in a way and saw the best in others, in his world, then he would show God that he and his generation was worthy of having the best seen in them. I'll now stay on for a moment, and if you have questions, thoughts, you're welcome to write them in the chat. And it's a great story, and definitely deeper than it seems. So I'll stay on for a moment just to see if anybody has any questions. Okay, Yochev, I'm going to place your comment in Google Translate. What a beautiful blessing, Yochev. Yochev writes, and I'm going to read it in English because my Portuguese is still rusty. It says, may Hashem help us to be good and to be good to others, to judge with kindness and to see the light in others. And may others judge us with the same kindness so that we can open the heavenly gates. What a beautiful, beautiful blessing for us all. I think with that, we'll say Shavua Tov now. Thank you so much for that beautiful blessing, Yochev. And I challenge you this week. Try and see the best in others. Try to see the best in yourself. And maybe through that, we can merit that this month in Elul, and when it comes to Yom Kippur, God will see the best in us too. Okay, Shavua Tov, everybody. Shavua Tov, Yochev, to my mom, to Nathan, for joining us in the chat, and to everybody else who joined us on YouTube. We'll see you all next week. Shavua Tov.